And the second question is, how optimistic are you that the Western countries will listen to you when they really desperately need air bases in Uzbekistan now, when Pakistan is changing their policy towards transit for NATO to Afghanistan?
Well, I think when you look at the whole picture in Uzbekistan, habeas corpus is just one sort of good example of how the Uzbek government has tried to say what the West wants to hear. I think there was a moment, maybe 10 years ago, when the Special Rapporteur on Torture, this is the only visit in 10 years by a UN expert that the Uzbek government has allowed, visited the country, made an assessment that torture in Uzbekistan was systematic and widespread. And that was a moment, at least. Human Rights Watch certainly welcomed the fact that the Uzbek government had taken the step to issue that invitation to engage with the UN experts, the human rights expert on torture. And of course, that was his central recommendation, that you adopt habeas corpus. You can stop the cycle of torture if you bring a person before a judge in the first days or hours even after their arrest. So it represented a hope for change, but you're right, very quickly, and especially with Andijan, that the government showed it didn't have the will to implement it. I think we always have to advocate for international human rights law. That's our mandate, and I think that's the model that we use in terms of framing political change in Uzbekistan. So were the government to actually commit to eradicating torture and implementing habeas corpus in line with international standards, I think it could do so. We've seen examples where change does sometimes come peacefully when there's political will. But maybe as to the second question, I should leave that to Jan.
Well, we are optimistic now. We need to be optimistic when we work with human rights. We're optimistic now that the raised attention on the forgotten dictatorship and the neglected victims of Uzbekistan would lead Western and other governments to not exchange basis for turning a blind eye to human rights abuse. We believe it's a false choice. It's not either having a base or be interested in human rights. You can be both. You have to be both. You can never, ever, as I said, compromise on human rights in that way. It will come back to haunt you. That was what one thought. One had to be friends with Mubarak because it was the big strategic ally. One had to have these military deals with the dictatorship. Now I know that the US and the Europeans regret that position. I think they will regret the same in the future unless they change. And what they do or not do these coming months, they will live to be happy about or regret in the future. So we're hopeful.
If I just add, just quickly, optimistic also because, sadly, the findings of this report are gruesome and new. They provide new evidence for Western governments, which we're intending to confront Western governments with, that torture and other human rights abuses are so severe in Uzbekistan. We think this will change the argument, essentially, with Western governments. We think that we'll no longer be able to look away so easily. It's not, in the press release, we called Uzbekistan a pariah state. We don't do that too easily. We think it's in the same category as Syria, Sudan, Iran, and other similar severe human rights abusers, which are outside the normal process of dialogue on international human rights. We think the evidence in this new report provides that sort of substantial evidence to make that case.